Most people think they're awake. They believe their thoughts are their own, their choices deliberate. But if you pause and look closer, there's something strange hiding in plain sight. The repetition. Same worries, same arguments, same dreams. Deferred. It's like living in a room with invisible walls, a space that feels limitless until you try to walk beyond it. This is where most of humanity spends its life, inside a subtle cage they can't see, not because it's locked from the outside, but because no one ever pointed out the bars. The mind runs on habits shaped by biology and polished by culture. And the strangest part? It feels normal. We wake up, check our phones, chase goals, fight over ideas, fall in love, get hurt, repeat. There's a rhythm to it all, a loop we mistake for freedom. But what if that loop is just the first floor in a much taller building? Most people never question the structure. They assume this is all there is, and if things feel off, maybe they just need a better job, a new partner, or a different belief system. But no upgrade inside the prison changes the fact that it's still a prison. What if your entire sense of self was shaped by patterns you didn't choose? What if most of what you feel and think is simply the software of a survival system running on autopilot? The truth is, consciousness can evolve. It's not fixed. But that evolution doesn't happen by accident. It begins with seeing the trap. This series isn't about philosophy for its own sake. It's a flashlight aimed at the walls you didn't know were there. Because the moment you notice them, something begins to shift, and that shift changes everything. Consciousness didn't start with questions. It started with danger. Before language, before ideas, before the concept of a self, there was only the urge to stay alive. In this first and oldest layer of awareness, the world is nothing more than threats and needs. Hunger, pain, fear, the heartbeat of survival. At this level, there's no room for reflection, only instinct. The body takes over. It flinches before the mind can catch up. You smell smoke and your legs move. You hear a loud noise and your pulse spikes. This is not thinking, it's programming. And the code is ancient. Even today, with cities and smartphones, that primal system still runs underneath. It's why your heart races when someone yells. Why a harsh email feels like a threat. Why comfort feels earned and the unknown dangerous. The brain's oldest regions, those deep reptilian structures, still scan the world as if you were in a jungle. They don't care if you're enlightened. They care if you're breathing, and so most people live here not because they choose to, but because the system keeps looping. You work to survive. You compete. You protect what's yours. You react. Always alert. Always on edge. The modern world has upgraded the costumes. We're not running from tigers anymore, but the fear, the tension, the drive to protect and consume, still there, just dressed in business suits, social media feeds, and deadlines. The tragedy isn't that this system exists. It once saved us. The tragedy is thinking it's all we are. Because as long as you believe survival is the peak of awareness, you'll never see the staircase leading higher. You'll defend the cage like it's a kingdom, and every reaction will feel like a decision. But what if it isn't? Once the body feels safe enough, another force rises, emotion. Now the mind isn't just dodging threats, it's reacting to memories, to stories, to imagined fears. You're not afraid of being eaten anymore, but now you fear being ignored, rejected, judged, left behind. At this stage, consciousness is hijacked by feelings. A glance becomes a verdict. A silence feels like punishment. The heart races not from physical danger, but from the thought of not being good enough. It's still survival, just wearing a social mask. This emotional layer is powered by a mind that remembers pain and prepares for it, even when there's no real danger. It stores every wound and filters the present through the past. That offhand comment from a co-worker, it lands on a bruise formed years ago. The nervousness before a date, it echoes every goodbye you've never processed. and the brain plays along. The emotional centers, especially the amygdala, keep scanning for what might go wrong. Not because you're weak, but because your system was trained to keep you safe at any cost. So you defend. You withdraw. You chase approval, not because you want it, but because not having it feels like a threat. Love becomes a negotiation. Conflict becomes war. Even silence becomes a weapon. And yet, none of this feels extreme. It feels normal, like this is just how people are. But this emotional turbulence isn't the destination. It's another flaw in the building of the mind. The trap here is subtle. We think we're making choices, but most of the time we're reacting, playing out loops shaped by old pain. Habits of the heart. And until you see that, really see it, you'll keep calling the storm inside you personality. But it's not. It's programming. At some point, the emotional chaos becomes unbearable. You get tired of feeling ruled by moods, worn out from reacting to every flicker of discomfort. That's when something shifts. The mind steps in and says, wait, this is the rise of reason. For the first time, you don't just feel, you observe. You begin to question your own patterns. Instead of being swept away by emotions, you pause and try to understand them. It feels like a breakthrough, and in many ways it is. Now thought becomes a tool. Logic enters the scene. You analyze what once overwhelmed you. You name the patterns. You trace the roots. You build explanations for pain, frameworks for living, systems to organize reality. This stage is where knowledge becomes power. Science, philosophy, language, all sharpened into instruments of clarity. The world starts making sense, or at least seems like it could, and with understanding comes control. You shape your environment. You shape your future. You build identities, not from fear or emotion, but from ideas. Who am I becomes a question with answers, careers, beliefs, credentials. Modern life rewards this kind of mind. It builds structures, solves problems, creates innovation. The thinker becomes the architect of their own reality, but quietly another illusion creeps in. You start to believe that thinking is freedom, that if you can name it, understand it, outsmart it, you're above it. That logic alone will lead to peace. But the thinking mind has a shadow. It doesn't just analyze. It clings, it loops, it isolates. You become so wrapped in thoughts that you lose touch with what can't be explained. The felt, the subtle, the silent, and so, even here, the trap remains. A prison made not of fear or feeling, but of ideas. Eventually the intellect runs out of road. You've read the books, asked the questions, debated the theories, but something still feels hollow. Knowing more doesn't always mean feeling more. And so the mind, tired of circling itself, finally quiets, just enough for something softer to be heard. The heart speaks. At this level, consciousness shifts again. No longer driven by fear or ruled by thought, awareness begins to open toward connection. Not the kind built on shared opinions or mutual benefit, but something deeper, a recognition. You look at another person and see a reflection, not a stranger. Empathy stops being a choice and becomes a reflex. You feel the pain of others as if it were your own, not because you should, but because the boundary between you and them starts to blur. Judgment loses its grip. You stop needing to win arguments or prove yourself right. You start listening, really listening, not to respond, but to understand. And in that space, everything changes. Success isn't satisfying if it isolates you. Achievement feels empty if it costs someone else their peace. Life starts moving in a new direction, not outward toward status or control, but inward, toward authenticity. Compassion becomes the compass. Presence becomes the practice. Relationships deepen, not because they're perfect, but because you show up more honestly, less guarded, more open. This is not Sentimentality. It's not weakness, it's clarity. Because for the first time you realize that love, not the romantic kind, but the raw, unconditional presence kind, is intelligence too. It sees what the mind can't. It knows without needing proof. And it heals not by solving, but by staying. Many who arrive here describe it as a kind of homecoming. Not to a place, but to a way of being they'd forgotten was possible. After the heart opens, something even more unexpected can happen. The edges of reality begin to dissolve. Not metaphorically, viscerally. At this level, consciousness stops seeing the world as separate pieces and starts sensing it as one continuous presence. Trees, buildings, people, breath, all part of the same unfolding event. There is no center, no outside, just awareness, stretching in all directions. It's not an idea. It's an experience, one that silences the need to define anything at all. There's a quiet peace here, not because life stops being messy, but because the mind stops resisting it. The usual sense of me versus the world fades. And with that, a deep calm takes its place. Not the kind you earn, the kind that just is. Time softens. Space loses its rigidity. You look at the sky and feel it looking back. There's no need to chase meaning anymore because everything already feels meaningful. In scientific terms, researchers call this a mystical experience. Brain scans show the self-referencing parts of the brain go quiet, but no scan can explain the way this state feels. The intimacy, the vastness, the stillness that seems to hold everything without effort. And then, just as quickly, it can vanish. But even a brief moment here rewires something. You come back changed, less reactive, more attuned. You speak slower, listen more. You're less interested in control and more curious about wonder. This isn't about transcending life. It's about recognizing you were never separate from it, to begin with. And once that realization touches you, even for a second, the world never looks quite the same again. If cosmic consciousness feels like merging with the universe, non-dual awareness goes one step further. It removes even the one who's merging. Here, there is no you watching the experience. There is only experience. This isn't about becoming something greater. It's about realizing you were never anything separate to begin with. The boundary between observer and observed disappears. Thoughts still happen. Sounds continue. Life unfolds. But there's no one in the middle claiming ownership of any of it. Awareness just is. Language starts to fail here because all words are built on division. Self and other, here and there, now and then. But in this state, those divisions collapse. There's no subject, no object, just the raw presence of reality, unfiltered, unclaimed. You're not floating in bliss. You're not escaping the world. You're not even a you anymore. At least not in the usual way. It's not a trance, it's not a dream. It's the clearest perception possible, the simplest, the one that doesn't add anything extra. And yet it's almost impossible to describe without breaking its silence. Those who touch this state often return with less to say, but more to live. They stop needing to be right, stop needing to prove or achieve or fix, because in that space beyond self, nothing is missing. And once you've seen that everything is already whole, you stop searching for wholeness. There's no technique to stay here, no path to force your way in. It arrives when striving ends, when the veil of identity drops, not dramatically, but like a curtain that was never nailed down. What's left isn't something new. It's what was always here, waiting. Awakening isn't a straight path. It loops, it stumbles, it forgets. One day you might feel open, spacious, clear. The next you're caught in traffic, annoyed, spiraling back into the same habits you thought you left behind. That's not failure. That's the nature of consciousness. It breathes in cycles. Even the most expansive experiences don't make you immune to being human. Enlightenment isn't a permanent upgrade. It's a glimpse, sometimes lasting seconds, into what lies beyond the noise, But life keeps calling you back. Back into your relationships, your triggers, your unfinished business. The ego doesn't die once. It rebuilds itself in clever ways. It might wear spiritual clothes now, speak in wise phrases, quote sacred texts, but it's still clinging, still trying to be someone, still trying to win. The real test isn't how high you can fly, but how gently you land when you fall. How honestly you meet the ordinary. Can you bring presence to dishes, emails, awkward silences? Can you stay awake while being painfully human? Because growth doesn't mean escaping the lower levels. It means returning to them with eyes open. With less judgment, with more space, you'll still feel fear, still get angry, still say things you regret. But over time, the reactions soften. The stories don't stick as long. The return to peace gets shorter. And that's the shift. Not perfection, not constant bliss, but a different relationship to the mess. One that doesn't resist it. One that sees beauty even in the breakdown. Freedom isn't a destination. It's a rhythm, a movement between forgetting and remembering, closing and opening. So when it gets messy again, and it will, don't panic. Just breathe, return, and keep walking.